Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Committee. This meeting is being streamed live on YouTube, so good evening to any interested viewers that may be viewing this meeting. Can I please ask for patience should the meeting move at a slightly slower pace? This will allow us to work through the agenda and deal with any technical issues that may arise. When wishing to speak, I'd ask if members and attendees could raise their hand and wait to be invited and speak by myself. Your microphone will then be unmuted and you'll be able to speak. Members are asked to vote by raising their hands to indicate if they are in favour, against, or wishing to abstain from the motion. Did you want to come in on this one, Mike?
So thank you, Chair. Just before we get proceedings underway, with regards to agenda item 5, the annual budget update, unfortunately, Pete Hudson, the Section 151 officer, has been called away on an emergency. So what I'm suggesting, Chair, is that we withdraw the item from discussion here. The annual budget update will also be going to Cabinet. So if any members have any interest in raising any points or any discussion points, to read the Cabinet agenda, and obviously can come back to myself or Shane with any comments to feedback.
Okay, thank you, Mike. Agenda item 1. This item is to receive apologies for any absence. Can I ask if there have been any apologies submitted, please?
No, we've not had any apologies, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Lynn. Item agenda number 2. This is to consider any declarations as disclosable pecuniary or personal interests and non-disclosable pecuniary other interests. Can I ask if there have been any declarations, please?
Nobody's indicating, Chair.
Yeah, thank you. Item agenda 3. This item is to approve as a correct record the minutes of the last meeting held on the 26th of November 2020. Can I have a mover and a seconder of the minutes, please? I've got Councillor Grounds and Councillor Waters. Thank you. Item agenda 4.
So if we can just vote on that, Chair, just
yes. So
if we can have a show of hands for those in favour.
Okay.
Any against or abstentions? I'm aware Councillor Smallridge is new to the committee. He was appointed to the committee at the last meeting of council, so he won't be aware of the prior discussions at this meeting, Chair.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Okay, so agenda item 4. This item, the corporate plan performance April to September 2020 update. The Assistant Director for Corporate Services and Transformation is in attendance to update the committee. So welcome, Joe.
Hiya, thank you, Chair. Thank you for receiving me tonight. I'm here to update Overview and Scrutiny Committee as per usual with the performance update in regards to progress against the corporate plan and our corporate priorities, and also progress against specific measures that are in the what we call the corporate performance scorecard. Also, the report that's presented to you not only picks up the Q2 position, which is April to September 2020, but also where it was deemed relevant to also pick up with you any updates up to the end of December, which indicate how we've been able to respond as a result of the impact of the ongoing impact of the pandemic in regards to our continued provision of services and delivery of the corporate plan, if that makes sense. So what I'm presenting to committee this evening is to consider and review the levels of performance achieved against the corporate plan and the scorecard, but also to note the significant level of continuous service provision to date, despite the impacts of the pandemic. Just a little reminder for members of the committee that just to explain that the corporate plan actually sits in the middle of our corporate performance management and project management framework. It's a key element of our performance framework. The plan itself, as I've mentioned, contains our corporate priorities and also indicates particular actions that we intend to take to deliver those priorities, but also indicates some measures, the way that we'll measure success of delivering those priorities. And they're basically sat in our corporate scorecard. So appended with the report was also the corporate scorecard report in terms of those specific measures. They do measure, just for clarity, they do measure performance of Ashfield District Council as an organisation, not specifically measures that might be deemed as more appropriate in terms of what's happening across the district. And they're what we call our place measures that give us a feel for what's happening in Ashfield as a place. So just to move on, just to clarify as well that we review the corporate plan on an annual basis, and every year, sort of from April to June, we undertake quite an in-depth review of the corporate plan and what we're aiming to deliver against our priorities. And this year, as you can imagine, we undertook a review which also considered early doors what we expected the impact of the pandemic to be. As I've been noting in other committee meetings, just to note that, as members will no doubt already be aware, that Ashfield is the only local authority in Nottinghamshire that has delivered all Tier 1 and Tier 2 critical services without interruption during the pandemic to date, and we continue to do so. And that has required really effective working across the council. As one council, we've been redeploying staff into important roles to make sure that those business critical services are continued to be delivered. And we've also been supporting humanitarian services across the district as well. In terms of the corporate scorecard, the overall position is that from April to September, just over 70%, so 71% of the measures in the scorecard have achieved the target that we set or are within 10% variance of target, which is an extremely good position to be in given the impacts of the pandemic. We also look at the measures in terms of whether they've improved compared to the same period last year. And 61% of the measures in the scorecard have improved or are within 5% of last year's performance levels the same period of time during the financial year. So it's not as high as what we'd normally achieve, but it is significantly high, when you take into account the impacts of the pandemic. The report then goes into, as you'll see, quite a lot of detail, and the details aligned to each one of our corporate priorities. I've got no intention on running through all of that this evening, but just to bring a few key things to members' attention. So, for example, in the health and happiness priority, there's been a lot of movement in terms of the Kirkby Leisure Centre, and the works have now commenced on site there in that regard. Quite a lot mentioned in the report in terms of our support for community groups throughout the year, and also support for the Feel Good Food project that's dealt with reducing food poverty across the district. Moving on to homes and housing priority, some significant achievements there. So, for example, from April to September, we've actually prevented 35% more households from becoming homeless than compared to the same period in the previous year. And we've also acquired 32 new social housing properties, and we're looking to further purchase some more throughout this year and into next year. One of the other key things to bring to members' attention is that despite the pandemic, we've also successfully continued to undertake statutory duties such as the gas safety checks for our social housing properties. So that's a regulatory requirement. It's something that we need to do on an annual basis, every 12 months for every property. And up to the end of December, 99.66% of those properties have had a gas safety check undertaken despite the impacts of the pandemic, which is significant performance. Moving on to economic growth and place. As members will all be aware about the success of the Future High Streets bid for Sutton, with over £6.2 million awarded to Ashfield. And the fact that we've actually got in place COVID information officers now since October they're out there in the town centres around the district supporting retailers and businesses. I also wanted to bring to your attention in terms of cleaner, greener. We've seen a mix of performance in this area. So the levels of resident reported, so this is not actual incidents of dog fouling, but what gets reported to us by residents. So the levels of resident reported dog fouling has seen a continual decrease, so a further 9% reduction. And we've also seen a decrease in the levels of littering incidents that have reported to us. But the one area to bring to members' attention relates to fly tipping. So in the first quarter of the year, we saw a 5% decrease. But in the second quarter of the year, so that's July to September, we actually saw an increase, 5% increase in reported incidents. The report does show details in terms of fly tipping investigations and enforcement activity, which has increased. And I did actually ask if, the levels of fly tipping incidents that have been reported by residents has actually changed since the end of quarter two, so that's the end of September, and it is showing a decrease again. But just to bring to members' attention that we did see an increase in the second quarter between July and September. And then I'm going to move on to the safer and stronger priority. So to bring to members' attention that we have dealt with and responded to over 2,500 reports of antisocial behaviour and nuisance behaviour between April and September. And that's a significant 34% increase compared to the levels that we have responded to in the previous year. It could be a coincidence in terms of the impacts of lockdown, people working from home, school closures, that sort of thing. The other thing to bring to members' attention as well is domestic abuse remains a high priority. We recognise that, and on the back of that, we appointed a new domestic abuse and vulnerability officer in October last year. Finally, moving on to the innovate and improve priority, there's been quite a lot happening throughout the pandemic in relation to digital transformation. We've seen an increase in the number of online payments through our what we call our e-store, and a corresponding reduction in PayPoint and post office payments, which actually saves the council money because there's a transaction fee for each one of those payments through PayPoint and post office. We've also, as you'll be aware, we've also delivered a significant amount of business grants. And the figure in the report is up to the end of December of over £21 million. And I know that that's increased, the figure's increased since then in terms of the ongoing delivery of business grants. We've also delivered a brand new modern user-friendly website. So that was launched at the end of September last year. And one key thing to note is that we've not only met the minimum standards in terms of accessibility, our new website is actually fully accredited to meeting full accessibility requirements by an organisation called the Shore Trust, which is well recognised. And some of the statistics that are in the report are what we've gathered since the launch of the website, which indicate how much easier it is for customers, residents and businesses to actually find the information they want. The journey through the website is a lot easier, much easier than what it was before with the old website. One of the things I did want to bring to members' attention is regarding e-billing, and it is an area that we're continuing to look at in terms of digital transformation. So half of our businesses across the district are signed up for e-billing, which means that they can actually receive their bills electronically rather than paper-based. That position has sort of maintained itself. That was like a year-end position, so we would be seeking to try and improve upon that and increase that, particularly through digital transformation, make things easier for businesses, but also to help the organisation to realise efficiencies on the back of that. So that is an area that we're continuing to look at. We'd hope to see more than half of our businesses being signed up for that where possible. And then just finally that our sickness absence outturn has actually seen a 20% reduction compared to the previous year. So that the numbers of staff that are off with the sickness, sickness absence has reduced. One of the things, so what I want to do now is bring to members' attention those areas where there's been significant downturn in performance, and mostly these are impacted by the pandemic, and the report brings that to light, particularly those that are relate to our critical functions. So the first one of those is business rates collection. Our business rates collection at the end of September was just over 46%, and the target is just under 54%. So a significant drop as compared to target. We recognise that this is particularly impacted by the pandemic, restrictions on businesses that have either been forced to close or been significantly affected by the restrictions, under the various tiers and such like. I understand recovery has resumed, but the feeling from officers in that area is that the impact is such that it will take us a few years to actually pull things back in terms of recovery of and collection of those arrears. The other area that's been impacted again is a collection area, and that's in terms of rent. So our rent arrears levels have increased considerably. This is not just in relation to the pandemic, because obviously there's been impact there. Some of our tenants facing considerable changes in terms of their financial situations, but also the impact of universal credit rollout across the district as well. The other thing for members to be mindful of and to note is that the pandemic has actually impacted on our ability to take enforcement action. So delays through courts and backlogs of cases, but also the introduction of the extension of the notice period that we actually enable in terms of them being able to seek possession. So before the pandemic, the notice period was 3 months, and that's now been extended to 6 months as a result of the pandemic. So that actually does impact on our ability to take action to collect rent arrears. And then finally, I wanted to bring to members' attention about the significant reduction in performance in terms of the time taken to relet our empty properties. So when any of our properties becomes, the social housing properties become void, there's a series of activity that takes place to make that property then, to bring that property to standard that's it's then able to be relet. And then there's the reletting process as well. So the first bit in terms of the works required to get the property back to standard, the impact of the pandemic has been particularly felt if there's been any major works to some of those properties, because some of the major works required, we bring in specialist contractors to undertake that work. And as you can appreciate, particularly during the first lockdown this year, that was significantly impacted because those contractors weren't available when they went into furlough. So that has significantly impacted on the number of days to turn around those void properties, particularly if there are any major works that have been required. From July to September, the performance started to improve. So the average time to for any void relet improved to 32 days. And then I understand up to end of December that this has further improved again to 29 days average time. But our target is still above our target, because our target is to turn, on average, to turn our voids around in 21 days. And obviously, the quicker we can turn our voids around impacts on our ability to collect rent as well. So that they are the key bits to bring to members' attention from the performance report.
Thank you, Jo. Are there, I can see Shane's indicating.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Jo, for the update. I think there's one. I think there's two scorecards in there actually, but I just want to bring to members' attention that, and you'll all be familiar with it, in regards to rent collection, rent arrears. Obviously, this committee undertook a review of sort of the impact of universal credit way back in 2019. So obviously that was before that impact was compounded by COVID-19. And I think something that may be useful, and I'm wondering if members are interested in this, is if we invite Nikki Moss to come along to a future meeting of this committee to update the committee on, the some of the recommendations that was made and approved by Cabinet, how they've been implemented, and also, because we keep seeing it crop up as as an area of concern for us. So I think it's important for this committee to have that feedback from Nikki, and also see maybe some of the plans. I know it's difficult to make plans and improve the performance, because it was a problem before COVID-19 became a thing. Universal credit and the full rollout of it was always going to increase rent arrears and difficulties with rent collection. So I think it's worth this committee's time to revisit that, even if it's just for one meeting. And then just additionally, I think, just almost skipping ahead to the next agenda item, Scrutiny panel are undertaking a review of sort of tenancy support. So it'll be an introductory meeting next week on that. And I think there's a couple of performance indicators in this report that again will be useful for members there, and I'll bring that to their attention. And that's regarding proportion of tenants who remain in their tenancy for 6 months. That's something that members of Scrutiny panel will be interested in, and also the money management advice that we're offering, and things like, and the eviction as well. So eviction process, obviously there's not much we can influence there as in Scrutiny, but there is a protocol that the government has set out that we have to follow, and members will be talked through that by Nikki and Phil Warrington next week.
Councillor David Waters.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just a couple of points that to ask Jo, if I may. Very, very basic. It's just so I can better understand the layout of the corporate scorecard. If you look on page 23, page 24, yeah, this multicoloured sheet, when it comes to the performance indicator status, on the very right-hand column, it says RAG status. I'm just trying to understand what is the RAG, and a really, really nitpicky one from me. On page 32, we're talking about non-domestic rates, and the subheading is percentage of NNDR collected. Is that just a typo, or does the added N make a difference in some way? I'm just not really clear on that. Thank you.
I can answer those, Chair.
Yeah, please.
The RAG status, it's commonly used in the performance world. It represents red, amber, green. So so red, something is, you know, sort of way off track or outside of any tolerances that we set. Amber would be something within tolerance. So you know, in terms of target, we tend to set a 10% tolerance. So something would be amber if it's within the 10%.
Yeah.
And then obviously green means it's meeting or
Excellent.
exceeded. It's a typical performance person's tool. In terms of NNDR, so that's national non-domestic rates. So that's actually our business rates. It's just a term for business rates.
Lovely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you. Are there any questions at all from any members, please? Councillor Jim Bragdon.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, Joe, it's excellent news on the recycling. It really is. The numbers going down, because when you drive around the area and you see this awful mess that people just dump, it drives you mad. So I'm really pleased that the figures are dropping. The only time they seem to peak or go up was July to September. Is that the period, Joe, when the Nottinghamshire County Council closed recycling centres? Did that have an influence on it, do you think?
Can I just clarify, is it, Councillor Blagden, is it the recycling PI performance indicator that you're looking at in the scorecard?
Yeah.
Because that indicator, it's better to be bigger. So the bigger that number is better if we can recycle more. It's a percentage of the waste that we collect as a council. How much of that is recyclable as opposed to not recyclable? So I think it did.
Yeah, I get what you mean.
I think it did drop a tiny little bit. It's not significant, but it's not quite as high as the same period last year. The other thing that does impact on that as well, those figures, is some of the things, some of the, you know, the collections from, say, bottle banks and clothing banks and things in the district. Those figures tend to be a bit latent coming through, a bit longer getting through to us to add to that figure. So sometimes the figure says 40%, and then by the time we get all the other little bits of information through, it might go up to 41%, say.
Yeah, so the stuff that's dumped and we have to clear up, don't come up in our recycle figures?
No, so that's a fly tipping. I think that actually would count. No, because it's domestic waste that is counted for the recycling. So I'm not sure whether the fly tipping weights are added to that or not, but it is something that I can actually check into.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions for Joe, please? Mike.
Thank you, Chair. So there's a couple of things, Joe, and a lot of them have already been to scrutiny over the years as part of the ongoing scrutiny reviews. The first one, your report mentions about the White Ribbon campaign and domestic violence, and obviously one of the big news stories and one of the fears with a prolonged lockdown is that there will be a big rise in domestic violence cases. Can you tell us whether that is starting to filter through? Is that being borne out by some of the figures? And if so, obviously with the appointment of the new officer, will they be given a directive of, obviously we're in unprecedented times of innovative ways of reaching out to people, because it's no longer possible to do that in the traditional means?
Yes, thanks, Mike. I'm not actually sure, you know, with the officer starting in post in October, I'm not sure, it's not been raised with me in terms of what they've been able to impact as yet, apart from that they're playing a key role on the, in terms of attending the multi-agency risk assessment conferences, so what's called the MARACs. So it is something that I'd like to pick up, you know, in terms of ongoing assessment of performance against the corporate scorecard and corporate plan, you know, the value that office is adding. So it is something I'll note to pick up for the next update.
Absolutely, thank you.
And I know it is, like you say, it is an area that's been highlighted. I think it's been highlighted across the whole country in terms of the impacts of the ongoing lockdown on increasing rates of domestic abuse.
Yeah, and if I can, Chair, there's another area which is under the economic growth banner. Obviously, in the past, the scrutiny panels have considered the area of markets quite in depth over the years, Joe. And again, you know, I think inevitably most questions, any questions that are going to be asked are going to be impacted by COVID and have an underlying theme of COVID. But obviously markets were at risk before the pandemic. And I think, you know, a succession of both scrutiny reviews and strategic reviews have tried everything they can to boost markets, including the Sutton indoor market, refurb and encouraging people to come in. That's obviously been impacted massively. Are we seeing a reduction in the take-up of stalls as a result of COVID? I understand that some of them are non-essential units, so they wouldn't be trading, but even those that are essential units, have we seen, you know, are we making even bigger losses in our community as a result of COVID on the market scene?
So as I understand it, the indoor market is performing really well despite the impacts of the pandemic. And you're quite right to raise this, Mike, because we know in the past we've actually undertaken several reviews of our markets, and the indoor market has always stood out in terms of performance, and particularly since we've, you know, sort of we undertook all the improvement works in the indoor market, even more so. It has continually been the outdoor markets that we've been considering even pre-pandemic in terms of days of the week, you know, where the value is added, days of the week, and location, and whether it's pop-up stalls or permanent stalls and all of that sort of thing. We've been here long enough to, you know, it sort of keeps doing the full circle and being reconsidered again. Before the pandemic, because I'm not sure about, you know, sort of what's been happening in terms of particular stores in the pandemic, but I can get into that and ask for the detail. But I know before the pandemic that the one area at the district where the markets seemed to be flourishing was Hucknall, and I believe that might have been as a result of the changes that were made in terms of the positioning of the market. You know, and there were, as I understand, there were some traders that were actually, you know, sort of, there weren't enough spaces for traders that were wanting to come to Hucknall Market. I'm not sure if that, you know, if that's still the case now, but obviously, you know, with the impacts of the pandemic. But yeah, Hucknall, before the pandemic, Hucknall was definitely the better flourishing market in terms of the towns in the district and the markets that we were running. And as you say, there's always been ongoing considerations of, you know, the sites for the markets and the way that they're run and the days of the week in terms of getting the most footfall.
Absolutely, and how we can kind of do our best to boost, you know, that the kind of tradition of people going to markets. And I think as a council, obviously in the past, the outcomes from a number of the reviews have recommended the council trying to improve footfall within those markets and improve the market's experience as well.
Yeah, because I know that we've looked at, sort of themed markets instead of traditional, to run alongside the traditional markets to, in terms of better use of our market as a facility, that sort of thing. And I guess it is a consideration in terms of the ongoing impact of the pandemic and people's shopping habits, not only on markets but on the high street as a whole. But it is something to be mindful of.
And I think if you'll just indulge me on one last item, Chair. The last item I wanted to raise was with regards to CCTV, Joe. Again, a very topical issue that has been to scrutiny a number of times. Obviously, we're fully aware that we as a council have invested in ensuring that our CCTV is fit for purpose and up in the appropriate areas. Obviously, from it's early days since the new locations of the cameras, but has there been any word from the police in terms of how we constructively use those to reduce antisocial behaviour and crime in our parks and open spaces and in our residential areas?
It's not anything that's been fed through to me in terms of updates for this report, but again, it is something that I can pick up for the next iteration of the report.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, Shane.
Thank you, Chairman. I've just got another sort of topic I'd like to bring to members' attention, and I know some members have already raised this, and I think unfortunately it was something more to discuss with Pete. All the best to Pete this evening, and I'm not sure if you can offer any insight on this, Joe, but it's regarding our commercial property portfolio and the investments with that. I'm aware that there's been some changes in legislation in regards to how we can manage our portfolio, and I know that in the past it's really been sort of a linchpin of the way we've been planning for the future when it comes to supporting services, and I'm wondering if there's as I say, if you can offer the committee any insight into how these changes may impact service delivery, or maybe is it too soon to tell?
The little that I know is that obviously we've placed a lot of emphasis on increasing income into the local authority from those commercial properties, the investments that we've made in properties, and we've been increasing the amount of investment in those properties over the last few years to generate more and more income for us in terms of the return on that investment. I do understand, I don't understand all the ins and outs of it, but I do understand that of late, like you say, Shane, that there's been government restrictions imposed that impact on our borrowing, and therefore the result of that is that we won't be undertaking any further new investments. So we still have the properties that we've invested in, and we'll still have the income coming in from those properties, but we won't be expanding our portfolio in terms of taking on and investing in further properties to bring in additional income on top of what we're already achieving. So the emphasis then is switching to where we can make efficiencies rather than the growth in income. And that will be the big emphasis, and that's the bit that I do know about in terms of our efficiency programme. So the things that we're looking at will be reviewing services so that things don't stand still. Can we do things in a better way that's cheaper? Changing roles and structures and that sort of thing. Digital comes into that, so the way that we deliver services, either what we call channel shift, so customers do more for themselves, self-serve online, rather than having to physically come in to see us or pick up the phone, which reduces the demand that's coming in through those channels that what we see as more expensive. So somebody coming to see us face to face is more than 10-fold, 100-fold more expensive than somebody interacting with us digitally through our website, for example. So that's the sort of thing that we're looking at as well. And the other thing is sort of our use of our assets. So are there potential opportunities to rationalise our assets, which could reduce costs? So that's something else that we're looking at. And then finally, a member of my team has actually started a review to look at procurement. As an organisation, we do spend a lot of money on goods and services. So we're looking for opportunities in that regard to find efficiencies, spend less, working with our partners at Nottingham City Council to support us in our procurement activity as well. So that's a piece of work that's just started, and with the amount of money that we spend on goods and services, you would think that there's even 1% efficiency in that regard would be a significant savings. So we're having to switch to looking for savings, as opposed to in the past we've looked to increase income from commercial properties. I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's lovely. Thank you, Joe. I understand that, in terms of the details of, these restrictions and stuff, I don't have a clue. It goes straight over my head. So, but it's interesting to think how, the mindset of the council will have to change a little bit with this change. So I think that's something, for this committee to keep an eye on and see how that maybe does impact services. And as you say, as we move towards looking at things with an efficiency scope rather than growth. So that's lovely. Thank you, Joe.
You're welcome.
Are there any other questions from members at all, please? Okay, well, thank you, Joe. Oh, sorry, Councillor David Walters.
Yeah, just a quick word on that. Don't forget the Finance Committee will also be well in touch with things like that was just discussed. Okay, I don't want to duplicate any effort. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, thank you, Joe, for your attendance and for your reports.
Thank you very much.
You're more than welcome to stay, but if you want to exit, you can.
I'm going to go and get my tea.
I don't blame you.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody.
Thank
Night.
Good night. So what was item agenda 6, which is sort of now item agenda 5? This item is regarding the scrutiny work plan. Shane, please, can you provide the committee with the update on the work plan?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'll keep it brief. We might be in for a short meeting tonight, which I didn't think was possible anymore, especially following council last week. But I'll go ahead and give the committee an update on some of the topics that are being looked at the moment, and also just the sort of view that me and Mike have as we move into maybe refreshing the work plan, because I think, this time around it's going to be difficult for us to include as many topics, but I'll get onto that. So just to briefly update members on obviously the work of the committees and panels. This committee previously was undertaking the review of play park inclusivity. That's something that we definitely wanted to continue today. Unfortunately, myself, Mike, the chair and vice chair have been in conversations with officers, and we've had to offer some flexibility in the way that we invite officers to the meeting. And understandably, some officers have been working on some really key projects, such as the Towns Fund, the Future High Streets Fund, and they weren't able to attend this evening to talk to us about play park inclusivity. I'm hoping that's something that we can do in the future. I know Councillor Grounds, you might have an update for the committee regarding that topic and some of the work you've been doing outside of the committee.
Yeah. I know we've not really had much discussions about it in the committee, but I've been having a lot of discussions with Will Kent and Sarah Daniels in the background. I've not been pushing a lot for all parks at the minute, but one chance that I did get to push something through with Sorrel Drive, the new park that's being built there at the moment. So I've had discussions with Will and Sarah, and I have had to be able to get quite a bit of inclusive stuff added. They're moving some things around, so the swings are being moved, so it's closer to the path, so it's more accessible for children in wheelchairs. They're swapping one of the swings for a Hax Mirage seat, which is where a disabled child will be able to fit in it and be more comfortable in it. They're adding more sensory items, and one thing that I'm really proud of is they're now adding a huge signboard that teaches British Sign Language. So every letter of the alphabet in British Sign Language will be on that board. It's going to be in colours that are visible for visually impaired children. And I think it's a really nice attachment to be added to the park, because it's not something that's seen in the UK. I've only ever seen it in America. But yeah, it's really good. I've had a few people message straight away saying that I'm now on their Christmas card list because they've finally been thought of in the district. So yeah, even though it's not been discussed, things are still happening in the background, and it's going really well, I think.
And just to come back on that, Chair, I think thank you for that update, Councillor Grimes. I think it is excellent to hear that progress is being made even outside. We've only had one meeting on it prior, so it's good to hear that work's being done, and that, you know, this committee's having influence on something as important as that.
Absolutely.
So just to move on to Scrutiny Panel A, I know there's a lot of crossover members on each committee, so sorry if you're hearing stuff I've already said before. But Scrutiny Panel A meeting next week. They're wrapping up the review of Armed Forces Community Support. I know we've got a set of draft recommendations going next week to be approved, which will then be sent to Cabinet, and some good recommendations in there regarding from training for members and for staff, frontline staff, also for sort of developing some literature to help out these the Armed Forces community, and let them know what sort of services we offer and they can benefit from. So we'll be finishing up that review next week and straight on to the next one, which is the topic that was added at the last meeting of this committee, which is tenancy support. So as I sort of alluded to earlier, you know, that's covering everything from money management advice, you know, the introductory tenancies we have, looking at the eviction procedure and how, you know, the influence we can have on that. We could maybe streamline that, granted that we are under sort of the cosh of the government and the protocols that they set out. So that's starting next week. And then Scrutiny Panel B, some of you will be aware that we are currently undertaking a review of sort of the Council's commitment to climate change mitigation. We've currently had one meeting and also a working group on that. And I think, you know, it's clear to members that it's a hefty topic, and it's taken some time for us just to focus in on what we can influence. But we've had some productive meetings on that, and you know, there's a greater understanding of what the council's currently doing, what we're signed up to, the funding opportunities we're exploring. Again, it is a very wide topic, so we'll be working through that review, just, you know, keeping a keen eye on the scope of it, make sure we don't go too wide on that. And then finally, obviously we've got the work of the COVID-19 Response and Recovery Scrutiny Panel, which some of you are members of. Last meeting we had Richard Mitchell come along, who's Chief Executive of Sherwood Forest Hospitals Trust, and he was really insightful at the meeting, and we were happy to have him along. I think in future meetings we'll be looking at how we work with the voluntary sector and also charities in the district. I think that's really important for us to look at. Councillor Grant, I know you put that forward for us to look at. So that's sort of the work that's going on at the minute. I understand there's a couple of topics. I think there's one topic that we've not been able to start yet, which was added last year, and that's sort of waste and recycling, which we definitely want to start. I'm just trying to find a space for it somewhere. And I think, again, just to speak about the work plan and managing that, I think that's been the difficulty this year. Obviously, you know, there's been times where we've had to, you know, allow flexibility for officers and say, okay, you know, you don't need to come along to this meeting because we know you're working on this, that, and the other. I think when it comes to new topics, obviously we've got one more meeting in this cycle, this municipal cycle, which is in March, and then once we follow on from the AGM, the first meeting of this committee following the AGM is when we'd normally set a new work plan. I think realistically we're going to have probably 3 or 4 topics that are still on the work plan. So it'll be something to consider at that time as to, you know, the best way to add new topics. I think it's not something that we definitely don't want to halt work of scrutiny, and we still want to be continuing on with the reviews. And that's something that we set out to do, even, regardless of the COVID-19 pandemic. And then, well, obviously we've got the committee on top of that. But yeah, we just need to sort of monitor our workload a little bit. But every topic that we add onto the work plan, I'm keen that we do get to review it because they're added for a reason. Mike, I don't know if you've got anything to add onto that as I'm waffling on.
Thanks, Shane. Not a great deal. I think you've summarised really well. Really, I think, as you've said, there are a couple of topics that are rolling over, and I know the waste and recycling, which was suggested by Councillor Rostons, is another topic that we really want to, not just pay lip service to, but actually carry out a really involved look into that as part of Scrutiny's role. We would normally be going out to consultation on the work plan now, but as Shane has said, we're not halting any topics being put onto the work plan, but we're probably rethinking how we do that in light of some of the current challenges. And those challenges are not just the social challenges that everyone has due to the pandemic, but also in terms of the workloads of officers and you as members in being able to commit to this whilst you're supporting your local constituents. We have worked with senior management team and with senior officers to provide that flexibility, including moving some meetings around and postponing some topics to ensure that the key priority areas of the council are at the forefront. Obviously, when we look at an issue on the work plan, we work very closely with officers, which is time intensive. It does involve us liaising very closely over a prolonged period of time with other officers. And part of the challenges that we've had at the moment, particularly around ensuring that officers are freed up to quite rightly put their resources into applying for the high street funds and to maintaining frontline services in some very challenging times. So for that, I think, obviously it's good we've been able to maintain and continue with our current workload, albeit that there has been some delays, but I think that's to be expected, Chair. So if you as members do have anything that you want to put forward, we're certainly not suggesting that you don't put it forward, but obviously what we'll do is ensure that we prioritise in the best way that we possibly can and ensure those topics that do need priority and are time limited will come to the forefront. This will inevitably have a knock-on effect to some other topics which may get pushed back and be delayed. And that's all I wanted to say, Chair. I think Councillor Rostons wants to come in as well, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Rostons, please.
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I just wanted to say quickly about the waste and recycling. It can go on the back burner for a bit because, as we said in the last Scrutiny B panel, we're waiting on some more information to come to light. And to be fair, we're talking a lot about waste and recycling in the Environment Scrutiny Panel B panel anyway. So it was fine for that one to go on the back burner. But when what Shane said about getting Nicky Moss in about the universal credit and have an update on that, I think if we can squeeze that in somewhere, that'd be really, really good. Thanks, Chair.
Councillor Smallridge.
Yeah. Can we include the topic that's been brought up before about buying local and using local firms if possible, and if it's economic? That's it, the question. Can we include that?
If I can come in here, Chair.
Yeah.
I take on board what you're saying, Councillor Smallridge, and obviously that was subject of a motion at Council recently. what I would say is if we sit on that before we formally put that on, obviously so members can give it some consideration. I think under the current times of challenging local economy anyway, I think we need to ensure that what we look at is the right topic for us at this particular time. So I'm by no means kind of pushing it off because it's not for me to say no, but I would just suggest a little bit of caution because it went through quite a rigorous discussion at council last week.
Councillor Grounds, please.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the possibility of us discussing in the future roadside memorials for young adults that have died in crashes, because one of the biggest complaints I got last year was mainly Diamond Avenue, where there was a roadside memorial on there, and at one point there was over 100 motorbikes attending that site in the evening, upsetting a lot of the residents. And I was wondering if there's any way we could look at managing.
If I can come, sorry, Shane.
No, you're all right, Mike.
I was just about to say, yeah, thanks, Councillor Grounds. I think we did review that recently. What I'd probably say is we get an informal update that we can circulate to the committee first, and then obviously based on where that currently stands, then you as a panel can take a view as to whether there's anywhere we can go with it. I think from recollection, it was probably about 15 months ago or so that we
admitted them.
Yeah. So I think probably what we'll do first, Councillor Grounds, is me and Shane will try and get a formal update circulated from the relevant officers before it becomes a formal topic, and then obviously based on that update, if you as a panel still feel that there's room to look into, then obviously you can have that discussion as part of the work plan discussion.
Yeah, and I mean, there's something that could probably run alongside that as well, is the boy races that are now, instead of congregating at the roundabout at the M1, they're now in Portland Park a lot and causing a lot of people up there as well.
Yeah.
Shane,
we've got that noted down.
Yes, Chair, just quickly, just on the suggestion about the buying local topic, just to say, obviously Joe did mention that we're currently undertaking a review of our procurement process, and I know a lot of that, the sort of issues raised in that motion are regarding procurement, so it'd be interesting to see the work of that review and the outcomes from that before we sort of dip our toes into that. I think that's all I had to say on that, Chair. Thank you.
Councillor Blagden, please.
Thank you, Chairman. Chairman, I'd just like to support Councillor Grounds on his memorial way of going forward. I mean, we have a huge problem, and Councillor Rossens will understand where I'm coming from on this in Hucknall. Should have been sorted out years ago, and it just caused trouble. You know, if it's young people, you get bikers, and it just grow and grow, and then they start to get out of hand. So we really do need to be on top of it and look at it. So I would support you on that, Councillor Grounds, wholeheartedly.
Cheers, Jim.
Shane.
Yeah, just to come in on that, Mike, you were referring to, it was originally put up as a topic, I think you're right, around 15 months ago. It was when it was following the last local elections. It was suggested and members decided not to vote to put it on the work plan. It's clear that obviously it's an issue that comes up a lot, and it's a community issue, and that's something that maybe
right,
where we should be spending our time and effort. So I think what Mike said is maybe the best way to go. If we can bring an update to members at the next meeting of this committee in March on this standing work plan item, so we can scope it out and see where we can go with that review. The thing I'm hesitant, the reason I'm hesitant with that review is basically we're going to be making recommendations potentially to the council's decision makers, and I'm unsure if they're willing to take those decisions, because thinking pragmatically about it, it's a very emotive topic, roadside memorials, and I think that could cause a few problems in the review, but maybe that's something that shouldn't stop us from reviewing it anyway. It might be something that's difficult to review and make decisions on but you know, that's something that we have to do sometimes. So it's just something to bear in mind regarding roadside memorials.
Councillor Grant.
If I could just come back on that about not with the aim to stop the memorials actually taking place, because last year I was able to get a really good solution where I think it was Craig Morley and his off-road bike team attended one of the memorials, and anybody that was causing trouble, they quickly sorted that issue out. So the memorial went on quite well in the end. So it's more of making sure, trying to get a note of where the memorials are, when they take place, and making sure our teams are there, making sure they run smoothly rather than letting hundreds congregate and cause havoc, basically.
Are there any other comments or questions, please? Councillor David Waters.
Can I just drag you back to the investment properties question that Mike raised, just really to clarify? We did speak about this at the last audit committee, and I'll just quote you the bit now, as if I've got the paperwork in front of me. We used to get quite a few of our funds to purchase these properties from the Public Works Loans Board, the PWLB, but they've released some new terms, and I'll just read it to you. The new term states that authorities will no longer be able to use the PWB borrowing if their capital plans include schemes where the primary aim is assets to yield, i.e. purchase of investment properties. So I'm not saying that's the answer to it, Mike, but I bet you that belongs somewhere in the big puzzle. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Okay. Are there any other questions or comments, please? Okay. Well, thank you all for your attendance this evening. I will now bring this meeting to a close.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.